Yo, what is up, everybody? It is the Beast, Brian London. How are you? We're all just trying to hang in, man. Listen, if you hear the sound of my voice, if you're watching my big, fat face right now, subscribe to the channel, please. Trying to get up to 1,000 subs, as they call it in the YouTube world. It's been a goal of mine. So if we can make that happen, it'd be great. So subscribe to the channel, share the videos. Like, dislike, whatever you want, comment. Hit me up on the socials at Miami Radio Beast. And, do me a favor. My son is coming to his own. The 12-year-old is full of creativity. And if you go check out his TikTok, if it's not banned by now, because it's owned by China and they're stealing all your information, go hit up my son on TikTok. Just watch his videos. The kid's awesome. At Zach, Z-A-C-H, randomizing things. Don't ask. I have no idea where he got that from. Zach, Z-A-C-H, randomizing things. All right, today's video, after we lost George Rodriguez, who was most known for being the producer, sidekick of the great Neil Rogers, I decided I would make a little left turn and start getting into some of my 25 years in radio and tell stories. So I threw it out to the audience, or the people watching, the viewers, the listeners, whatever you are out there, consumers. What do you want to hear? What do you want to hear about? And I've gotten a million requests. I'm have a backlog of stories I need to tell. And you can continue, please comment. What do you want to hear about? What do you want to know about? I've done it all in this business. What do you want to know? Either whether it's specific people, or it's just general industry questions like, why the hell is radio dying? Feel free to ask, and I'll get to it. So the biggest one I got after I posted my video in a tribute to George was, what was it like to work with Neal? What was Neal like? And so I thought that would be the first one that I would attack. Let me set this up a little bit. So I obviously grew up in Boston. Yeah, it's wicked awesome, dude. And in a very non-racist part of the state, where we were more hippie-ish, tiptoeing through the tulips, just loving everyone and everything. Not the racist idiots that occupy other parts of the city. But growing up in Boston, I had no idea who Neil Rogers was. Came down to go to the University of Miami in 1994. And somewhere around that time, Bud Paxson, who bought that cluster that turned into Clear Channel, then turned into iHeart. Bud Paxson bought the cluster that had IOD and INZ and Zeta and all that stuff. He came and spoke at one of my broadcasting classes. And I don't remember what year it was, whether it was 94, 95, somewhere around there, 95, 96, somewhere between 94 and 96. I'm going 95. I think it was 95. And I remember one of my classmates who was from down here asking him, because he was very religious, asking him how he could kind of be the religious guy that he is and buy a station that has the Neil Rogers on it, that guy, and I was like, and whatever, I tuned out his answer. I was busy, who knows what. But that led me to okay, this Neil Rogers, I gotta check this out. So I found WIOD on my AM radio. And listen, college kids aren't listening, especially from out of state. We're not, they're not listening to the local stations, really. I was on WVUM, the UM station, and I listened to that. Every once in a while I get my card, I would just flip around looking for some music. Most of the time I was just hitting CDs. But now I consciously was like, okay, let's check out the local radio scene. And so I went and found WIOD. And I found Neal and Rick and Suds, and at the time, Brooke Daniels and Randy Rhoads and all this stuff. And so that was my introduction to Neal, was somewhere during my college career. So basically, Neal had already been a staple, a legend in this town for 20 years plus. By the time I found him, so I wasn't there for the Zeta days with the Bird, and I wasn't there for Neal's fights for against the homophobia in this town and all that stuff. I wasn't there for the early part of Neal's career. I was there from 95, 96 on. So really, I got like 10 years of Neal. So that's my setup. And then so I listened, and I instantly fell in love with Neal. The way he did his show, I just thought he was so quick. I'm like, this is amazing radio. So lo and behold, I go to intern at WQAM in April of 1997, and immediately upon stepping foot in the rat-infested, bug-infested studios, which I said are literally, like, if I look out this window right over here, I could almost throw a baseball to where the studios were. Like, if I get a good roll, it could hit where the studios were, which is sad because I would have been, 20 feet from work. But studios were just east of Palm and Sheridan, rat-infested, bug-infested, as Hank would call them, and they were terrible. They were basically trailers. It was disgusting. There was bugs and rats and all sorts of disgustingness, but it's where QAM and Kiss Country were. And Power 96 was in another building. So QAM and Kiss were owned by two guys, Dan and Jeff. I think their last name was Cohen. I'm going to go with that. They were referred to as the Kosher Cowboys because they were into country stuff, yet Jewish, which is an odd thing. Just before I got to QAM, they sold the stations Kiss and QAM to Greg Reed, who owned Power 96, along with, he had a partnership with the Beasley family. So then we became Beasley Reed Acquisitions with Kiss, QAM, and Power 96. So I get to QAM in April of 97, and immediately I learned that Neal has left IOD, and he's coming to QAM when his non-compete is up at the end of the year. So I was like, all right, this is cool. We're gonna rock. We had the first team with Joe and Defo and Goldie at the time. This was the lineup when I got there. Joe, Defo, and Goldie in the morning. Then we had Boog and Chris from 10 to 2. Then Hank went from 2 to 6. And then 6 to 10 was either games or someone would do a show. I forget exactly what was going on. And then 10 p.m. to the last game ends was Eddie K. That was our lineup. That's where I got my start down here. So I learned that Neal's coming over. So all of a sudden, as I said in my last video, George Rodriguez is walking around the studios, and basically, to explain again, so in radio you have a non-compete. It could be 90 days, 6 months, a year. Mine was, I believe, 6 months. There's no radio to go to, so it doesn't matter. But so George had a non-compete. He couldn't be on the air. He couldn't produce, but he could be hired in a different capacity. So that's a big way, at least in the past, where radio companies have gotten around non-competes in order to secure talent. Is they'll hire somebody they want eventually to serve in an on-air position or an important position. They'll hire them as something else. They'll list their position as production person or whatever it may be. So George was serving as a production person, helping our production guy, make all the commercials and all that stuff. So that's how Greg Reed got around that. So George was on the payroll doing production. He was running around. That's when I first met George. Great guy. Go watch my video on him. Amazing. And then it became time in December. I was actually at home in Boston, and Neal came on the air at WQAM, and I believe it was December 30th, 1997. And he had a studio built for him in the Power 96 building, which was at 20295 Northwest 2nd Avenue on 441 in Miami Gardens. That's where Power 96 was. And he would do a show on the second floor of that building while the signal was sent back via ISDN, digital phone line, to the rat-infested, bug-infested in Cooper City, formerly known as Hollywood. And then it would get beamed to the transmitter, and boom, you have the Neal Rogers Show. So I remember listening to Neal's first show in WQAM. I was like, this is awesome. I'm at the same station as Neal. Got back to Florida, and my good buddy Joe Costello, he was the one that was board-opping Neal's show from the Sheridan studios, while George and Neal were in the studios in Miami Gardens. And then we all moved into the same building. QAM and KISS moved, or KISS actually moved into its own building, where it was then CBS Radio for a while, the old Clear Channel building. That's where KISS moved, all by itself in a building meant for 7 stations. I never understood it. Power and QAM shared the same building. We ended up all being on the 3rd floor of that building at 20295. So, I don't remember when I first met Neal. That's kind of hazy, as is a lot of that time, for reasons you can imagine. But I do remember early on just going to sit. Neal had a separate, this is weird to me, because all throughout my radio career and internships that I had done in different radio stations across the country, like there was one main studio for a station. And, if the AM show was over, there'd be a commercial break, and then the next guy would come in, and it would just keep going in the same studio. This is the first time that I've been exposed to, wait, this talent is so big in nature, in fame, in stature, that he gets his own studio. So there was the regular QAM studio where the First Team and Hank and Manage and all these guys would do their shows, but Neal had his own studio that was across the hall. So basically I would, at the time I was working various shifts. I either board hopping or producing or wherever they needed me. And then eventually, in 99 got on the Canes broadcast and all that stuff. But I didn't have a set, I'm working the First Team or I'm working Hank's show. Later on that would come into effect. So I would just be in the building at different times. And whenever I got in the building, I would always take a chance and just go sit in Neal's studio. And Neal's studio was divided up into 2 rooms. The ante room was where George produced the show from and answered the phones and ran the commercials. And then there was Neal's actual studio. And I would go in, and I would really try not to be seen. And I would just grab a chair and just push off to the side where Neal really couldn't see me, but I could just kind of peek, because I just wanted to watch him do radio. I wanted to watch him and George do radio. And right off the bat, I was like, Neal, this is the smartest guy I've ever, it didn't matter what the topic was. Neal knew about it. And I was just amazed at how quick he was and how smart he was. And there's a lot of big stories going on in that time, that he was covering, and I was just enamored with all of it. The bits that Boca Brian, now known as Boca Brittany, were doing, all of this stuff. I just became enamored with it. And I would just go sit and watch, really. And then I maybe got a little more confidence up to be able to actually, be in the picture. And of course, Neal would, you guys remember, Neal would just kill me on my weight and all the other stuff. But I think the one thing that we all loved about Neal in the building was that he had balls. Big, bleeping, brass balls. He did not care. So all the stuff that we were all afraid to talk about because of fear of being fired or retribution, he didn't care. So what ended up happening is, basically, if something went down on any other aspect of the radio stations in the building, somewhere else, someone was stooping somebody, or this happened or that happened, we would just go tell Neal, and Neal would basically get it on the air. And it was our way of making sure that things were, kind of like Neal was like the overseer of the stations, so that like management or whoever couldn't get away with what they were trying to get away with. Because back in those days, it was, man, the Greg Reed days, and I liked Greg, and got along with him fine. But back in those days, man, it was still it was still crazy radio, man. I mean, Don Cox was on Power 96 for like a third time. Kid Curry was running Power 96, and it was still had that old school radio feel. I mean, like artists would come in on every Tuesday to go meet with Kid Curry and Eddie Mix and Tony the Tiger, and local artists would have a chance to debut their music, and QAM, you know, like was still like just dominating in ratings, and like it was just that it was really a good time in radio to be there. But there was a lot of shit going on in the building, man, that was just ridiculous. And we would just, everyone, it didn't matter who was a salesperson, whatever. During a break, during Neal's breaks, you would walk into Neal's studio and there'd be like 3, 4, 5 people in there just be like, you got to hear what this person did, this person, and Neal loved it. He loved the gossip, and he was going to go rail on everybody, right? He was just going to, whoever it was, he was going to go rail on. So it became a habit for those of us that were like, you know, underpaid, underappreciated, shat on in the building, to just go tell Neal what was going on. And he would stand up for us, and he would stick up for us, and he would out the crap that was going on in the building. And it kind of empowered us. And management hated it. But that was our outlet, man. Like we had the guy that was, I still say this to this day. I believe that Neal Rogers was the number one, the best non-syndicated talk show host of all time. That's truly believe. So a lot of our interactions with Neal were just us telling him, or him pulling it out of us, of what was going on in the building. We would all congregate in that studio and tell him, hey, this happened. And then it would go on the air, or a bit would be made about it. Especially when I was unfortunately producing the Mo Howard show. Every day was something with that guy. I mean, I could make 7 videos about that guy. But so like every day after I was done with Howard's show, at 10 o'clock, or whatever time it was, I mean, I would go into Neal and just be like, this guy did this. Once again, he ordered breakfast and he refused to tip the driver, made the interns do it, like just every story. And that's half the bits you heard about Howard on the station, or a lot of them came from either, you know, me or Zach or Greeper or somebody going to tell Neal or George, like, this idiot did this today, whatever. So, that was a lot of our interactions with Neal. And I think Neal had a love-hate relationship with me, as did a lot of people. I don't know what it is about me, but I definitely have a way of provoking people, either in a good way or a bad way. And there was definitely a lot of times I could get under people's skin, not by trying, but I just have this way about me. And so I think Neal went through a love-hate thing with me, but I did have the honor, you know, if George was out sick, I'd get to sit in, and that's, you know, that was a great, you know, anytime I got called on to run Neal's show in that studio, and then you're basically co-hosting with Neal. You're the guy that he's bouncing stuff off of. I mean, I was honored, and there was a handful of times, maybe 4 or 5 times, where I actually filled in for Neal. I actually got to do a show. And I mean, anyone that did it, whether it was Joe Costello or me or whoever got to fill those shoes for that day, I mean, the enormity of sitting in his chair, of being at his board, of filling that seat for that day, I mean, you physically felt it. Like, it wasn't like, there are times when I fill in for Hank or Mandich or somebody else and do a sports talk show, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's great, that's awesome. But when you go to fill in for Neal, and suddenly, like, you got this audience that's expecting, like, something, and they hear it's not Neal, and now you just know you're bleeped because it's not Neal, and you're like, oh, man, I gotta entertain people for 4 hours, and I'm not gonna sit here and talk about, the Hurricanes left tackle situation. Okay, like, you'd have to psych yourself up to do it. But, I did it a handful of times, and the most amazing experiences of even if I sucked, just to be able to have that chance. I mean, imagine if you're in New York and you get to fill in for Howard Stern, right? I mean, that's what it was akin to. It's like, you're in Miami and you get to fill in for Neal. Holy shit. Like, I mean, just need a diaper and go for it. But the one thing I can say about Neal, about working with him and in the same building, and obviously later in the career, he wasn't in the building very often. He was in Toronto, he was in Amsterdam, he was not in the building. So we'd basically, now we'd go spill our information. We'd talk to him, as we say in the business, down the line. So, he'd be, pumped into the studio, and you could go talk to him during the breaks down the line and feed him info. But the one thing I could say is about Neal is, and George, that operation, it was how radio is supposed to be done. Like, if there's a textbook about how radio is done, that's how you do it. Like, breaks are on time. Like, you hit the post at you have to be back at the top of the hour. It's done. Breaks are timed out perfectly. Music's hit perfectly. Board is run perfectly. Everything is done perfectly. There was not one thing that happened between Neal and George in that dynamic, in that radio studio, that wasn't textbook freaking amazing radio. It all was. The rest of the station, there was hell in a handbasket. But once you entered that space, Neal's space with George and Neal, shows were logged, shows were recorded, commercials ran, production was great, everything happened. It was the phone is ringing. I don't know who's calling me, but I really don't want any. No, I don't want anything from you. I don't understand who you are or why you're calling me. Why do I still have a home phone is a good question. It's because I have a fax machine that I still use, because my dad faxes me stuff and I fax stuff to him. So anyways, don't ask. I'm old school. So yeah, so basically being with Neal and George, that's how you learned radio. Being around both of them, perfect freaking radio. And then, obviously with Neal, he pushed the boundaries every day, and he could do it. He could pull it off. The rest of us couldn't. I couldn't say half the things that Neal said and get away with it. But he had built up such stature that it didn't matter. I can't tell you how many times groups would call in and we're going to picket and we're going to have a protest down 441 and we're going to shut you down and blah, blah, blah. And it didn't matter because he's Neil Rogers and he brings in all the money to the radio station and he's making a ton of money and he means something in this town and bleep you. And I miss that. I miss that because there's nothing like it today. And the paradigm has shifted. Certainly, as it has many times in radio, but I just miss having that voice of this area that that could speak up for what is going on in this banana republic. Certainly, I think there's I think Billy Corbin, he's got too much going on in his personal life, but I think Billy Corbin could be that guy. That could be the voice. He kind of is on social media. But that's the guy that I would look to in this town, that if he ever got a regular show, on radio, which is moving backwards. So but that would be the closest. But I owe Neal a lot. I owe Neal a lot because one, he would again, like I said, look out for all of us that were underpaid, overworked, and shat on by management. Two, a million times he tried to help me lose weight. Got me on the Balance for Life, which was a meal plan. Like he cared. And I think we had a connection because Neal loved hockey. He was obsessed with hockey. And growing up in Boston, at the time I was obsessed with hockey, and we would just go back and forth from like talking about old time Bruins and old time hockey. And I think that was fun for him because George wasn't into sports. George couldn't rattle off, who played defense for the 1979 Bruins. But I could, and that was just something that Neal loved. So I think he liked that. And I think Neal also understood that there were a few of us in that building that really loved radio beyond sports. That I think he laughed at the kids or the producers or whatever in the building that would come into the building, and they would just be about sports and balls and locker rooms, and like he thought that was funny. But those of us like Joe and me and a couple other people that like were really into this because of the medium of radio. I think he admired that. So I think there was a connection there. But here's a funny story. And I know I just blather on, and you're probably expecting to hear like more stuff, and there's a lot more. Eventually I'll get into specific stories, right? Like the Water Nazi or Screw Ann or Roy or like all this stuff. Like I'll get into specific stories as it relates to Neal. That's coming, but I just wanted an overview for this one. So here's the story. So, back in the day when we used to do van hits. So I was done with my shift, and then it was my turn to go out in the van, like all morning. They're like, go to find Beast and Miguel, at the corner of wherever and wherever. They're handing out Best of Neal CDs or t-shirts or whatever we were doing. And so before we went out in the van, like Miguel and I went to go talk to Neal, or maybe it was Joe or whoever it was that was with me. Like, hey, we're going to be there, and we were just joking around. And I don't know how we got on the topic, but I dared Neal to do a sports show. Like, for some reason, like, I don't know why, but like, I doubted, like, we got into some talk, and I was like, I don't know what it was about, but basically it ended up with me daring Neal to do 4 hours of sports, right? And he was like, all right, I mean, it'll be the worst show I do, but if you don't think I can do it, fat boy, like, just watch. And so we're in the van, and Neal, like, of course, tells a story, like, oh, Fat Beast is in here, and he's telling me I can't talk sports. Okay, whatever, like, I'm going to blow off half the audience, but here we go. And for the next 4 hours, this dude did the best sports talk show I've ever freaking heard in my life. He was he knew everything. Dolphins, Canes, like everything. He did the best sports talk show I've ever heard in my life, and I've worked with the best. And it blew my mind. I was like, I don't get it. Like, this guy talks about everything but hockey, like everything but sports except for hockey, and he just absolutely did the best sports talk show I've ever heard in my entire life. And it was like, I got back in the van and I went back, and he's just smiling at me like, I told you. And I was just like, holy shit. Like, this guy is literally the best. And there was no one better. Ever. All right, I know I was all over the place. But, and I will get to more specific stories. So if there's stuff you remember from that time that you want to hear about, let me know. Don't forget to subscribe, follow on the socials, all of that stuff. And keep it coming. Keep the comments coming as to what you want to hear about from my 25 years in radio. If there's a specific story you remember about, I mean, I have to get to Hank and Haitians in the headset. That was classic. I've got to get to the Joe Rose, Duff Lindsay fight where it was fuck me, fuck you. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that I saw. I mean, there was Pharrell night at the ballpark where an intern almost got arrested for having a sign that said Met suck dick for crack. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff going on in those days. So keep it coming, and hopefully I'll get to it. All right, that'll do it for me. I'll see you when I see you. Peace.